There's a name above all others, there's a name that leads the rest. 'Tis the name of Davey always, that stands only for the best. Here's to Davey, workers steadfast, Davey service tried and true. The proud spirit carries forward, Davey always here's to you.
Oddly enough, it all started with a book. The tree doctor brought John Davey and his two sons more tree work than they could handle. So they started training men and building the foundation of the Davey Tree Expert Company. Of course, the whole idea for the work we do came from the spirit of the man who wrote the book. And his spirit was shaped by a love of nature, a desire to learn, and a bit of well-taken fatherly advice. Throughout his life, John Davey repeatedly told of an incident that occurred in 1850, when he was 4 years old. "Do you know," Davey used to say, "it was the first great thing that ever happened to me. I had asked my father, who was planting potatoes, if I might plant one too. He told me to listen carefully, and with all the earnestness of which he was capable, he said, 'Do it right, or not at all.'" John Davey remained true to that simple motto. He met every challenge of his life with dedication and hard work. John Davey taught himself to read and write. Later, in 1873, he completed a 6-year apprenticeship in horticulture and landscape gardening. That same year, John Davey left his native England for the United States. Davey eventually became known as Kent's Tree Man of Town, through his work and his prolific writing and lecturing. Determined to gain acceptance of his idea of tree surgery, Davey wrote, photographed, and published The Tree Doctor in 1901. The book proved Davey's methods, generated a great deal of tree work, and brought Davey to the attention of prominent people such as author-philosopher Elbert Hubbard. John Davey's primary work is tree surgery. The secondary result of his work is not its effect upon the tree or the owner of the tree, but the influence of his work on society. John Davey is the answer to a prayer. I like to call him the tree's brother. As Davey's tree business grew and expanded into Boston and the Hudson Valley, John, with sons Wellington and Jim, started the Davey School of Practical Forestry, which trained others to assist in Davey's work. 1 year later, in 1906, Martin Davey joined his father and brothers, becoming Eastern partner of the business in 1907. These two events shaped the course of the company's history. The school developed what John Davey regarded as Davey Tree's most valuable assets, its employees. Martin, a natural salesman and leader, shared his father's views and developed advanced personnel practices as well as far-thinking business strategies. Out of the company's Tarrytown, New York offices, Martin expanded service into New Jersey and Connecticut before moving the company's office to Kent in 1908. On February 4, 1909, the Davey Tree Expert Company was incorporated with John as president and Martin as general manager and treasurer.
The Davey Institute of Tree Surgery, training its first class of 20 young men in the exacting new science of tree surgery. For 3 months, these stalwart men will study advanced methods of tree care, working with tools, belts, and ladders specially designed to be carried to the tops of high trees. Why undertake such rigorous training? These men are dedicated to the Davey motto of do it right or not at all, and they are well paid, $1 each per day.
Just as John Davey knew how to help trees flourish, Martin knew how to help Davey's employees grow. Martin was careful in his selection of new personnel, especially salesmen and foremen, and he made sure his people were rewarded. Successful employees were promoted, even to the Davey Board of Directors. With Davey's business expanding southward, Martin started the Davey Bulletin to maintain contact between the home office and employees. The Bulletin, and many other Davey publications, instructed employees in standard methods of operation, and in tree care, use, and preservation. Martin's communication efforts also reached the public at large through Davey's advertising program, started in 1910. By 1911, Davey Tree was working in 31 states and Canada. This included prestigious work on the grounds of the Canadian Parliament and on the famed Washington Elm by the U.S. Capitol. Davey Tree was gaining fame and success until Davey and the rest of the country were rocked by the First World War.
A joyful America welcomes home her fighting men, fresh from victory over the Kaiser. Thousands of brave and proud soldiers return to the land and families they fought so valiantly to protect, ready to go back to civilian life. Boys, we salute you.
Even as the nation began to rebuild, Davey Tree mourned the death of its founder, John Davey, in 1923. Still, in spite of these difficulties, the 20s were years of growth for Davey. This was due in part to modernization brought about by John Davey's youngest son, Paul. In an unpopular move, Paul Davey got the company involved in line clearing, a service that proved very successful. But Paul's greatest contribution to Davey Tree was introducing mechanization. The power rig sprayer in 1921, equipment for tree moving in 1926, an air tool for tree surgery, and the first air-cooled compressor, one of 50 inventions for which Paul Davey held patents.
100 ailing trees in Central Park are benefiting from a house call by a host of tree doctors, and what a sight to see. Mobs of spectators stood 3 deep to watch these daring Davey men perform their high-altitude works of mercy. All told, their work of pruning, feeding, and cultivating the trees should take 6 weeks.
The Davey work in Central Park was just one of Martin Davey's publicity ideas. In 1926, Davey Tree planted trees commemorating the 13 original states as part of the nation's sesquicentennial celebration in Philadelphia. And from 1929 to 1932, the Davey Hour radio show aired weekly from New York City on a network of 24 stations. By the start of the 1930s, Davey Tree had posted more than $3 million in annual sales and had over 1,000 employees.
I'm just a poor wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through a world of woe.
In 1932 and 33, Davey Tree lost money. And in 1933, the company had all of its money in 2 banks, which folded. The bright spot in those bleak times was the response of Davey workers to adversity. Many voluntarily went without paychecks for several weeks. Others asked for only $5 or $6 a week, and the home office staff went on half pay. The Davey family poured their personal assets into the company, and the Davey Tree Expert Company survived. Management and workers met the challenge together with dedication and hard work. During that time, Martin Davey said, "Adversity seems to draw people closer together and makes them stronger in the process." That strength would be needed soon again. In spite of difficulties caused by shortages of manpower and materials, Davey responded to the nation's plight. Martin headed a war bond drive in 1941, though he had suffered a heart attack earlier that year. The company published a vegetable garden guide as part of the stateside war effort, and in 1944, Davey Tree began post-war planning. Then, in 1946, Martin Davey died, to be succeeded by Martin Davey Jr., who had joined Davey Tree 8 years earlier. In a letter written the year before he died, Martin Sr. had asked his son to take over the company. "This is a good and honorable business. It is in sound condition, has excellent personnel, and enjoys a fine reputation. You will be the 3rd generation to carry our business and professional banner. I hope your most zealous ambition will be to carry it forward unsullied." Like his grandfather John, Martin Davey Jr. took his father's advice to heart. During his first year at the helm of Davey Tree, Martin Jr., better known as Brub, headed a strong recovery. The Davey Institute was reopened, profit sharing was begun, group insurance was improved, and the company grossed nearly $4 million. The next 10 years at Davey Tree saw great change and growth. New technologies were introduced: chemical brush control, power chainsaws, mist blowing, brush chipping, the Davey speed saw, Davey Tree food, and the use of aerial buckets. Benefits and training were improved. The Davey Technical Service Center was opened, and in 1956, Davey posted its first $10 million year. That year, in the Davey Bulletin, Brubb told his workers, "We should derive some feeling of satisfaction and pride in seeing what we have been able to do by working together." 5 years later, Brubb took ill and left the presidency of Davey Tree. Alexander Smith, Brubb's brother-in-law, was elected president of the company. During that decade, Davey established a tree farm in Worcester, started using infrared inspection, got its first non-family president in Paul Hershey, and in 1970 topped $25 million in annual sales. Activity continued at a frantic pace through the mid-70s. Davey Tree acquired 3 other tree service companies, began to emphasize residential tree care and landscaping, patented arbor green tree fertilizer, and restructured, then restored its management structure. In November of 1977, the Davey family announced 2 major decisions. Jack Joy was named president of Davey Tree, and the Davey family was selling the company.
We were all called in, the management group, on a Friday, and it was announced without any preliminary discussion that I was going to be appointed president among all my peers. And of course, immediately thereafter, the second announcement came that the company would be sold, which is interesting. But at any rate, I think that that began a period that was certainly a challenge. It was rather awesome to me at the time. But again, the employee ownership kicked off almost immediately after I became president with the 3-man employee committee. And it was really a true saga of Davey Tree. It presented a real challenge to the company and to management and the employees during the next 5 years, because the company incurred a very heavy debt during the acquisition days, as did the employees who committed to the acquisition in the form of personal debt. And as it turned out, the saga of Davey Tree was so successful during that 5-year period that the volume of the company, the sales volume of the company, more than doubled, and the earnings quadrupled. This was so important because it did enable us to pay down the debt, the large debt on which we had an interest cost that was very significant, but it also permitted us to invest well over $30 million back into the business in the form of new equipment, new programs, new buildings and properties and resources. And it truly was a period that was so important in order to prove that employee ownership was a viable way for a business to proceed. I think the Davey Company is really on the threshold of a great future. We really are on a threshold at this point in time, even though our volume has probably quadrupled or better in the last 7 or 8 years. I think that with the environmental question at hand, not only worldwide but certainly in the United States, that the Davey Company can be a major part in the environmental scheme of things and keeping America green. And we are stressing education for our employees regarding the environment, the proper use of pesticides, proper use of equipment, the quality work, the best fertilizers, and we're strictly going to be a quality company, as we have always strived to be, except that we are going to try and enhance that reputation and the actual results of our work.
Today, Davey Tree boasts 65 branch offices, a new corporate facility, and yearly revenues of more than $143 million. More importantly, Davey Tree can still boast of its most valuable asset, a dedicated, hard-working team alive with the spirit of John Davey.
There's a name above all others. There's a name that leads the rest. 'Tis the name of Davey always, that stands only for the best. Here's to Davey workers steadfast, Davey service tried and true. Spirit carries together.